Hi guys, welcome back to another GGF video. Today we'll be doing something a little bit differently. Recently the guys over at Kit Guru hit us up to do a water cooling tutorial video to share with the audience, which is you guys. So in this video we'll be covering the main basics of setting up a water cooling system. So first off in the video we actually cover the setting up a system with an all-in-one cooler. So we've gone with the Fractal Design S36 and then we take it that little bit further and we actually do a full custom water cooled loop where we show you installing the pump, the reservoir, and some of the blocks and so on. And we use the hard tubing loop as well. So some of the things we don't really focus too much on is things like choosing the right case for the setup, things like hard tube bending, and also maintenance, because we kind of feel that those things are sort of dedicated to a video for their own, and they really believe that they should be covered in another series. So first of all, I want to cover why do we water cool and why do people spend all this money to water cool. So there's sort of a few aspects to that. So probably the most important one is performance, because the cooler your hardware runs, the better overclocking you'll get and the more performance. Secondly is people like the look of it. You must admit that a really nice decked out water cooled system is 99% of the time going to look better than most air cooled system. And then lastly, the one that I feel that a lot of people just do it for is for the satisfaction. They're an enthusiast and they want to get more out of their system. So they'll build their system up, it'll look sweet, they'll get a bit bored, they'll want to take the next step. So what they'll do is they'll throw in some water cooling, they'll tinker with that, they'll tinker with this, and then they'll find that they'll just keep on doing it, and it normally evolves into a hobby. Sometimes they may not ever overclock, things like that. So it's sort of these whole areas that sort of get people into water cooling. So before I spend any more time on this, we'll jump in and we'll see what hardware we're using in this video. Alrighty, so here's all the gear we've got in front of us. So you can see there is quite a bit of gear to this build. We will be doing it in two stages with an all-in-one and a full custom loop build. So moving on to the case, when you think of a case company that has the best quality, the price, performance, we couldn't really go past Fractal Design. Now their new Define S is probably one of the best cases we've used for water cooling. It's got reservoir support along the side panel, it's got some pump mounts, and it's got some really great radiator support. As you can see along the top, you can fit a 360 along there, and also on the front you can fit a 360 as well. So it's got some nice features there. Now moving on to the all-in-one cooler, we've once again gone with Fractal Design. This is the Kelvin S36. Now they've teamed up with AlphaCool to produce this radiator. It's a 360mm all copper radiator, so you're going to get some great performance out of this, and it's also expandable as well. It uses your standard G-quarter fittings, so if you want to move to fully custom, you can just move to that quite easily. Now moving on to some of the other features, some of the less important features, we've got the power supply. We thought we may as well stick with Fractal Design. We've gone with the Edison M 750 watt gold. We're only using a 980, so we don't need to go overboard there. Now moving on to some of the other hardware that's not really important when you're doing a water cooling build. This will be different to what you have. We've gone with the Asus Z170-A motherboard. Got an NVIDIA Strix Asus GTX 980, two HyperX SSDs, a WD 2TB black, the i5 6600K, and a Vexia Blitz memory. Now moving on to the final part is all the custom water cooling. So I've saved this for last, and there's quite a bit here. Now we've gone with a AlphaCool 360mm Nexus XT45 full copper radiator. Now for a system like this radiator will go perfect. We've gone with the Bits Power block for the GTX 980. We've gone with the Bits Power Summit CPU block. Now we've gone with the full a res pump combo from Bits Power, which is the white one you can see at the back. I do like these units, it makes it a little bit easier. We've gone with black and white fittings. I'm not sure which ones we'll use. These are all G quarter. Now we've gone with the hard tubing, which is 12mm, so we've got the Bits Power C47 fittings. Now we've gone with the EK Pastel coolant, we don't know which color yet. And then we've gone with some compression fittings with some soft tube as well, just to mix it up a bit, because you don't always have to go with hard tube. You can mix it up a bit, but that's pretty much the outline of all the gear we've got. Now we'll jump in and we'll start building the system. So first off, I'm not going to cover installing the hardware like the power supply and motherboard. We're already going to assume that you know how to do that. And second off, we're not going to spend too much time installing the all-in-one. We want to focus on the custom gear. Now, first we've installed the CPU with some thermal paste. Now we need to install the pump block combo sidearms and the correct socket you're going to be using with the screws. Then we move on to installing the CPU backplate reinforcement bracket. That just simply adjusts to the right size. Then it just pushes into the back of the motherboard tray. Then we need to install the 3 supplied fans onto the radiator with the supplied screws. Then we move on to position the radiator in the case. So we've decided to go at the top of the case with the tubes pointing towards the front of the case to give us a little bit more leeway with the long tubes. Then we need to install the actual pump block combo onto the CPU. We do that by alternating tightening the 4 screws that we installed previously. So we do this by getting the right amount of pressure on the CPU. You don't want to do one corner at a time all the way to the end, and then that's pretty much it. Okay guys, so there you have it. There's the final phase of part 1 complete using the all-in-one cooler. As you can see, there's plenty of room in the case. The cooler fits in there nicely up the top. We probably could have even mounted it in the front as well and had it vertically. And moving on to another angle, we can see along the front there now, there's plenty of room for a reservoir and a pump for when we move on to the next phase, which is the full custom setup. Now we'll just have a look at the rear along the back. So that's it there, the 2 SSDs and the single hard drive. Plenty of room for cable management. I didn't spend too much time working on that. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this part. Now we'll focus more on doing the custom loop, and we should see a little bit more of the case filled up. So before we jump in and start building the system, I just want to run through some best practices when choosing and buying water cooling. Because if you're a beginner or starting out in water cooling, it can be quite daunting. So as previously we mentioned, we've gone with the Fractal Design Define S. Now to me, I think this is one of the best mid-entry water cooling cases there is. I'm pretty sure it retails for around $99 US, and you're not going to get much better than that. And this case has been designed with water cooling in mind. So we'll show you some of the features on that later on. Next, we'll move on to the radiator. So I've gone with an Alpha Cooler. I really do like the Alpha Cooler radiators. They're all copper fins with brass chambers, so they're really nice. And a good thing to note when buying water cooling, you want to try and keep all your materials the same. When it's your blocks, your fittings, your radiators, you don't want to be mixing aluminiums with copper and then brass and whatnot. So that's why I've gone with all the fittings are Bitspower. I've been using Bitspower quite a lot now. I wouldn't say they're the best. They are one of my sponsors. I'm not going to jump in and say they're the best. Everyone should buy them. I've been using them for a long time and I have never had any issues with them at all. To me, I certainly think they have the largest range of gear when it comes to colors and theming and things like that. They've got blue, they've got reds, they've got whites, and then the blacks, a few different blacks, carbon black. So to me, I think they're really good. Then we've got the blocks here. We've got your GPU blocks. So we've gone Bitspower again. So these are all nickel plated. This is the Strix 980 block there. And then we've gone with the Bitspower Summit block as well, which is a nice block. And then once again, these come in all different colors. You can get different colored plates, different colored tops. So they're nice as well. Then moving on to the pump and res combo. I'll go on with the pump and res combo because I do think for newcomers into water cooling, this unit is everything you need to get this loop sort of ready to go, to get filled. You don't have to worry about positioning a pump somewhere else, positioning a res, making sure your res is above your pump somewhere if it was all separate. Here you've got your res, you've got your pump top, and then you've got your pump down here, all in one unit. Now we're using a D5. I really like D5s, D5 or a DDC for most builds. That'll be fine. If you're moving up to say 4 or 5 radiators for some crazy reason, then you could probably throw in a second D5. But I'll show you later on how easy this is to fill, because I've got 3 inlets here. We'll just use one as a fill port, and then you're always going to have coolant running into your pump, because one rule of thumb is you never want to run your pumps dry. So you don't want to have your pump somewhere in the bottom of a case and your fill port up really high, and then you've got your pump running, and you're trying to get that coolant down to your pump. So it's really good to use a system like this. The fans I'm using are just the same ones from the Kelvin cooler that we used earlier. Now a lot of people tend to make a big fuss about specific radiator fans and all that, but if you're sort of doing water cooling on a budget or new to water cooling, I would suggest not to focus or spend too much on fans. sometimes you can get specific radiator fans that are nearly 3 times the cost as normal good fans. And when you're looking at that, that cost could be like the determining factor between a radiator or not, or between a reservoir and more fittings. So to me, for starting off, most fans will do the job fine. Then we've got our coolant. I'm using the EK Pastel. I really like that stuff. And then we've got our tubing over here. So I'm probably going to do this build with the hard tubing, the rigid. I really like this stuff, but I do have the flexi tubing here. Once I'm done, I might do a cost comparison between the all-in-one unit using the Kelvin, then using the flexi tubing, and then using the rigid. Because bear in mind, if you're not bending the rigid, if you're just going to do all straights and use bends, every corner you need to add in a bend, which is going to add up in cost. Whereas if you're doing the flexi tubing, all you need is a handful of compression fittings, and then you can create your own bends with the tubing. But yeah, that's pretty much for the outline of gear we're using. I'm going to jump in, and very similar with the all-in-one tutorial video, I'm going to go through with this one. We're going to install the block, pretty much the same concept. You still need to install the motherboard backplate. I've already installed this block. It's from a previous build, so I might just see if I can find some video, some photos on sort of the quick setup of installing this, because it does take a fair bit of time to take this off. And bear in mind, most water cooling gear is going to be different. This is the Bitspower gear. That doesn't mean that if you buy another brand, it's going to go on exactly the same. Every single brand is different, so I'm just covering over the gear that I've got. So what we'll do now is we'll jump in and we'll start installing this into the system. First off, we need to install the CPU reinforcement backplate. So just like the previous build, we're now using the Bitspower one instead of the AlphaCool one. We just slide this on and install the 4 locking screws. Now we need to look at the CPU block. Now these will all be different. We need to find the in and the out. Now with the Bitspower one, the out is the arrow is facing away from the hole, and the in is where the arrow is facing towards the hole. Now we need to mount this on our 4 screws we did previously, and we've gone with the Bitspower logo facing up. We then install the 4 protective washers like so. We then install the 4 springs and then the locking nuts. Now we need to tighten one each at a little bit of time on a diagonal axis. Now with the GPU block, I've already installed the block previously. Now yours is no doubt going to be different, so you just have to follow the instruction guide. As you can see, there's an example of the Bitspower one. It's quite simple. You just have to make sure you follow the cutting lengths for the thermal pads, and then that'll get you all sorted. Now you can see we've got the blocks installed. It's looking really nice. I'm starting to prefer this in the all-in-one setup already. We'll move over to getting the radiator installed. Now we just install the fans again, exactly like with the part 1 of the build, except this time we're using the Nexus AlphaCool radiator. Now we've mounted the radiator at the top. We've got the 2 blocks installed. Now we need to move on installing the pump and reservoir combo. Now we've gone with using the side mounts, as you can see. Now this comes stock in the Factual Design case, which I really do like. Now we're at the stage that we can start tubing this up, but before we move on to that, you might be wondering sort of what tools we need to progress further, or what tools we've used so far. So far to do all of this, and even when I installed the all-in-one cooler in part 1, I've needed nothing but a standard Phillips screwdriver. So I normally just have 2 sizes, Phillips screwdriver. Magnetic ones are good. And then the only sort of non-standard tool was I needed an Allen key to install the screws for the AlphaCool radiator, but it did come with an Allen key. But I also find it handy to have a few sets, the multi-set that'll have quite a few sizes, and I normally have the metric as well. Now moving on to some of the gear tools we'll be using for the tubing. If you're using flexi tubing, you can buy a dedicated tubing cutter. It's just a tool that you sort of splice it on and it cuts it. I do have one around somewhere, but I just can't find it. You can even use, if you don't want to fork out some money for that, you can just use some strong scissors. That works fine. Now moving on to the hard tube, it is a little bit more hardy. You just can't use scissors. Now you've got a few options here. You can buy a little hacksaw like this. I've used these before. This works fine. I guess if you're doing just one build, this will work fine. But for someone like me who does quite a few builds, I use a little cordless Dremel. Now I was sponsored by the good guys at Dremel. They sent me this one and a larger one, so these are great. Just has a few speeds. and this cuts it through fine. Bear in mind, if you are using this, you do need to wear protective gear because little bits go flying everywhere. Now, once you've got your right sizes cut, you just can't then stick this into the Bits Power tubing, the Bits Power fittings, because this is relatively sharp. Now, it's not just Bits Power you have this issue with. You have this issue with quite a few different brands of fittings. Now, you need to maybe invest in one of these. It's a little reamer, so it's got an inner and an outer. So what this does is it puts a nice bevel on the outside like this. You just turn it a few times and then it cleans up the shards on the inside. Then once you do it a few times, you get a nice bevel on the outside, and then you can simply just push it into the fitting like so. If you don't have one of these on hand, or you're having trouble finding one, you can just use a simple file. That's what I used for first few builds. I just used a file and then went around like that till it was nice. It doesn't have to be like completely rounded, so it feels completely smooth. It just has to be a bit of a bevel that it's not going to cut the rubber seals on the inside. All right, so moving on to the build, you can see everything's all in there now. I'm really liking the look of this. As you can see, this is starting to look way much better than using the all-in-one. Once I get this tubed up and get some nice bright, I'm really thinking I might go with the blue pastel coolant. It's really going to add a bit of bling to this system. Now what I'm going to do is just start adding the fittings. I'm probably going to go at the black fittings on the blocks on the top of the radiator up here. This is my two ports here, and then I need to go one in here and then one out here. Now bear in mind, with blocks, certain blocks, the ins and the outs are on a certain way. So as I just showed earlier, the CPU block, the out is down here and the in is up here. Now if this wasn't right with the build I'm doing, you can rotate the block around. Now Bits Power do it so the out port is when the arrow is pointing away from the hole, and when it's in, it's when the arrow is pointing towards the hole. Now with this GPU block, you can use any. There's no dedicated in or out, but with the pump and res combo, this is a must, where you must use the appropriate in and the appropriate out. So down here we've got an out, we've got an in up here, and then on the back we've got another port which we're not using at all, and then on the top is all ins. So we're going to be blocking off this in, and we'll be using this out, because we'll be coming down here and then we're coming out here, and I'll probably go up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start cutting up this tube. I probably won't go through cutting all this. It's quite simple. What you do is, once you've got your fittings in, you just measure between the two fittings. You just start at the start of the fitting, and then you just cut it, and that's it. So I'll get some lengths cut to the right length, and then I'll show you how to start installing it. Now, before I start cutting up the hard tube, what I like to do is I like to get all my fittings in and a rough idea on my loop layout. So we'll start with the pump. I'm going to come out of here. I'm going to go straight up into this port up here in the radiator. It's going to go across here, out here, across over here. Now this is the in on the CPU. We'll go out at the bottom of the CPU, across down to the first port on the GPU block, out of the second port, and then we'll probably go maybe across and then back up into the top of the res, and then that'll be the loop. Now when you're building a loop, you don't need to be concerned about what's the best way to do it. Do I need to do it the shortest pass possible? Can I have any high vertical lengths or things like that? If you're using a good pump, we're using a D5, well, we're not going to have any issues on running up a straight vertical about this length. So you don't have to worry about that. And you sort of just have to get creative, and you can do it to how you like it. You don't have to do it like this. You can do it completely different, but this is just the way I'm going to do this build. So what I'll do now is I'll cut the tube and tube it up, and then the next step will be to fill the system up. Now the loop is done. As you can see, that's everything there. So that's pretty much how I've gone around sort of doing this loop. Not too bad, I don't think. Everything's sort of parallel. Tried to keep these two tubes sort of parallel together. So what I'll do now is I've got one of these little plugs that you plug into your power supply, and it just makes the connection and it turns your power supply on without using the motherboard, because at the moment when we're filling this up, we don't want to have anything live. We don't want to have the motherboard running, the VGA card running. So all I want running is the pump. So I'm going to plug this into the 24 pin on the power supply, and all that does is it just shorts PS on, and it just starts a power supply. And then all I need to do is flick the switch on the back, and then that'll start it up. So now I just got to make sure we got all these stop fittings in. the two under the GPU, and that should be it. I've done the others on the top of the radiator, the front of the radiator, and then just here. Right, so what I'll start doing, I've got one port free at the back here on the top of the res, so I'm going to start filling this up. So I ended up going with the EK Pastel Blue coolant. For this one, you just mix one bottle, which is 250 mils with 750 mils of distilled water, and that gives you 1 litre. That should be enough for this. I really like the blue colour with the white and the black. It should go nicely together. Now, you're probably wondering, you've heard before that some people flush their loops and some people don't. I haven't flushed this loop because I've used this gear before and I know it's clean. But if you're getting secondhand gear or even gear from that's new, sometimes the manufacturing process can leave residue, so it is recommended to flush your loop beforehand. You just run some distilled water through it and then just drain it out. You can even buy additives to help flushing your loop, but normally you can just use distilled water. So what I'm going to do is start filling this up now. I've got a port free on the back here on the top of the res, and I'll fill this up to about halfway and then we'll turn it on just to make sure we've always got plenty of coolant running through the pump. And now I've actually invested in one of these little squeeze bottles. It's like a non-drip, because once you just release the pressure, it really doesn't sort of drip down. All right, now you might be wondering now, what about leaks? Well, I see some people, they sort of go overboard and they put like paper towel and tissues over every single fitting. Now, you don't really get leaks on a fitting unless it's loose or it's not in right or it's a dodgy rotary fitting. Now, I've never really had a fitting leak, so as long as they're all tight, and the fact is that nothing is live, the motherboard won't be on, the GPU isn't on, so even if you do get a leak, it normally just drops like one drop every, say, 10 seconds, and it's enough to just turn the system off and then grab a bit of towel and then just sort out that leak. I've never really had to put paper towel and go completely overboard like that. So what I'll do now is I'll turn this on, because we've got this nice and full. Now that should just suck this straight down. Now we'll just stop. It might flow back only because the radiator's up there. So now you want to make sure you stop pretty much as soon as that res is empty, just so you don't run that pump dry. Now hopefully we can get it in this radiator and down the other side, just so it doesn't flow back down. Oh, not quite yet. So we'll just see how much of that's going to flow back. It actually must be pretty close. Okay, yeah, so it's starting to, actually, yeah, it has. I couldn't quite see it. Alright, we'll turn it on again. Stop it. Alright, so now I'm getting a little bit low on coolant. Alright, now the bottles are filled up a little bit more. We'll add a bit more in. There's not going to be too much more to go until it makes a complete loop. So I've just done a few spot checks. No leaks so far. Everything looks pretty good. Okay, turn it off. I thought it was going to make the loop. Just add a bit more, won't need much more. So you can actually see what I just added was, I added this little, you get these little internal sort of extenders, because once your coolant runs back into the reservoir, if you don't have this little extender and you only have the reservoir half full, you're going to have this water sort of gushing down, and you don't really want that because it'll cause a little cyclone effect. So by installing this little extender that comes with these BitsPower reservoir, it doesn't allow you to have the res all the way full to the max. You can have it full anywhere as long as it's covering the extender. So I'll just turn this on once more. Now that should, there we go. Now it's going to have a fair bit of air bubbles. I'm not sure if you can hear that. It's kind of like fighting. It's sort of starting and stopping. It's not the pump starting and stopping. It's just the pressure that's changing. But once I sort of get this up a little bit here, Alrighty. Now, what you want to do once you've filled up a system like this, you want to leave this port off here for, some people say you can leave it for a day, but I haven't left them for that long. I normally just leave it for an hour or two just to get the pressure out. And then the next day, I just normally release the stop fitting and just see if there is any pressure buildup, and most of the time there isn't. Alright, so by leaving this on for a little bit longer, it'll just get that little bit of a foam off the top there. But as you can see, that's pretty much the loop done now. What I'm going to do is connect this all together and we'll just get some final shots. Alrighty guys, so there you have it. Our custom build is complete. So it did turn out really, really well. The time it took to do this over the all-in-one build wasn't too much longer. So it took about 35 to 45 minutes to cut all the tube and install the fittings. And as you can see there, the blue really does contrast well with the white and black. I won't show you the back of the case because that hasn't changed. And then we'll move on to look at the reservoir and pump area. You can really see there's still plenty of room, and we can even add a second radiator if we wanted to for a sort of a beefier system if you wanted to add a second video card. Alrighty, now, so just before I wrap up, I just want to cover sort of the cost of the different stages of this system. So because KitGuru probably runs on a global audience, I'm going to use US dollar for this. I found it the easiest to get a price on everything. Instead of going UK, and even where I am in Australia, it'll be hard converting it. So I've gone with US dollars. First of all, we'll just look at the system on its own. All the hardware without any sort of water cooling, the all-in-one system came to 1,784 US dollars. So mind you, it was a pretty sort of, I'll call this a high-end system, probably high mid-range to high-end. You're talking about a GTX 980. It was Skylake 6600K and so on. It did have 16 gigs of memory, so it was pretty high on. So moving on to an all-in-one system. So say you just want to cool your CPU, and with Kelvin S36, you're going to get good performance with cooling, and you're going to be able to get some decent overclocking because it is one of the best all-in-ones you can get. It is a 360, you got the 3 fans, so you're going to get better cooling than some of the smaller ones. So that retails for around 140, so that bumps it up to about 1924. So not too much more to get some decent performance out of your CPU, but bear in mind you've still got your stock video card or video cards if you've got more than one. Now moving on to the full system hardware, including using a flexi tube loop. So we didn't cover this too much, but say you're using just the soft tube, and with the soft tube you don't really need too many fittings because you can create your bends with the tube, you can be more relaxed, so the cost of the fittings are a lot less. So using all the adding the radiator, the pump and the resin, all that came to 742 USD just for the water cooling hardware and the flexi tubing. So that built the total system up to 2526 all up. Bear in mind, which that's not too bad because that's giving you probably the top performance you can get in a case this size. The only little bit better is if you stuck a 360 in the front, but we're only talking about one CPU and one video card. And to have a 360 at the top, especially these AlphaCool ones, they do run really well. So that's not too bad, the 742. And then if you want to slap in a second video card, all you have to do is spend just enough. I think the block was, GPU block was 140 US dollars. So just to throw in another one, you've got both of them. Now, the most expensive out of the whole lot was the full system plus the hard tube loop. Now, the bit that really kills that came in at 932 just for that water cooling gear alone. The BitsPower C47 fittings. So those ones retail at about $11 each, and you need one of those every time a hard tube enters and then exits on a fitting. So I think we ended up using a bit over 12 of those. And then when you're not bending the hard tube, you need angle fittings for every single bend. So it really bumps it up. So fittings alone was close to $350. So that's what really pushed it out. So the total cost for that build, including the hard tube loop, was $2,716. So it nearly puts it pretty much exactly $1,000 on just the spare or just the hardware itself. So bear in mind, if you do want a high-end loop for a high-end system, you're looking at about $1,000. But bear in mind, we are using BitsPower. BitsPower are probably one of the best. You get the most variety. Bear in mind, this the res and the pump top, the pump down itself, and even the pump cooler, that came in alone at $220. So there definitely are cheaper alternatives. It's just that I use Bits Power currently at home, and I had Bits Power on hand, so I did sort of go with the best of the best. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I just want to thank some of the sponsors for helping me out with this. I had Fractal Design pitch in for the cooler, the power supply. We didn't really cover the power supply because we don't really need that to cover water cooling, but it did a good job. And then we covered in the case, probably the most important thing. It would be interesting if Kit Guru want to continue these videos. I could do more on choosing the right case. I do have a ton of cases here that I have reviewed, so I could easily go over and sort of say the do's and don'ts in buying a case for water cooling. And then I could move on to things like maintaining your loop, and then also things like hard tubing as well. Also want to thank some of my other regular sponsors like Avexia, Bits Power, and also HyperX we use, Western Digital, and Asus as well. And lastly, I want to thank Kit Guru for sort of hitting me up for this. It's been a great opportunity. I know quite a lot of people will probably see this video, so I do thank them for that. And I want to thank you guys for watching, and hopefully we can do some more of these, and stay tuned for next time.